All right, welcome to episode 28, and we're covering a very important topic. This is scope in Python. So we've been working with scope, even though I haven't been necessarily addressing it every time we've been using it. What scope is it's a variable, basically, that's only available from inside the region it is created. So that's the scope. So you have local and global scope. Most things are going to be local scoped because if you're building a large scale app and you have too many things that are global scopes, then you can affect those and manipulate them and mess up your app pretty easily. So you want to be careful what you make scoped globally. For instance, if we just make like a simple function here and we just have whatever inside of it, and we have a variable, we'll call it x, and we'll make it worth 10, and then we print x. This is a local scope variable, right? So if we call myfunc here, we know that it's going to print that. So we come down, run it, print it, we get 10 back. So if we don't call myfunc and we just say something like print x, right? And due to indentation here, you can see that we're out of the scope. If we save it, ignore the error message, you see that it says x is not defined. And what that means is that in the scope of this print function, x is not defined because this print isn't giving us an error. And that's because this print is also inside myfunc, right? However, if we were to build a function inside of this function, a nested function, if you remember when we were talking about things being nested. So here, if we get rid of this print x and we do something like def inner func, we don't even have to pass in the x variable here because this is the nested function, so we'll have access to that x. And this is why indentation is so important. And we can even execute here like this, all from within inside my function. So then down here, all we have to do is call my function once, and it will execute all of that code. Don't know why I did that, but okay. Come down here and you see that we get 10. So 10 still defined, even though x isn't declared inside of this inner function. Because they're in the same scope here, they're both inside of myfunc, to inner function, x is available. And again, if we tried to print it out here, it would not be available. If we listed something in here, like we had y equals 90, and then we tried to print y where we're calling inner func here, you'll see that we have another scope issue. You can see the underline there, but just in case it isn't clear, I'll print it. You see that y is not defined. But if we were to take this y, cut and paste it here, no issue. And then we're not getting any errors, and that's because now y is available. So that's why indentation is so important in Python. Now, if we want to make something global, what we could do is just come here, and we'll just cut this out. If you want, you can comment it out if you want to keep notes or something like that. And we can just add it up here. And now everything's going to have access to that because it's a global variable. It's at the highest level. So again, no errors. And if you don't remember or we didn't cover it specifically, make sure you're declaring your variables before you're executing anything on them or calling any methods or functions on them. So like if x was down here, even though it's global, it wouldn't be initiated yet, and so we wouldn't have access to it. So also it's important to note that if we were to do something here where we declare x and then we change it inside of here, and we can copy that and print x out here and execute my function as well, you'll see that when we execute this, oh yeah, printing y, get rid of that. Save. When we execute this, we get 10 and we get 90. And 90 is coming from my function, which is the second thing that we're executing, which is why it's second. Printing x equal to 10 is the first thing we're doing. And since this is globally scoped, it's looking at this x. When we're reassigning a value in here, that's only applying to this local scope in Python. So Python actually treats them as two separate variables completely, one in the global scope and one inside the local scope. The other thing you can do is you can actually make a global variable by using the global keyword. So if we get rid of x here, we can actually just say global X. And we have to initiate it before assigning it a value. So then we want to assign it a value here. And you'll see we'll print it inside and outside just like we did last time. So the other thing we can do is use a global keyword, and for that we'll just do this again. We'll do myfunc. We're not going to nest functions in here, but we can use the global keyword here, and we'll initiate the variable X. Then we can, I don't know why I did that. Visual Studio messing with me sometimes. Global X, and then we can assign it a value. We'll just give it 100 here. And then we can call our function, which will initiate that variable. So we have to call this first, and then we're able to print X on the global scope, even though X is on the local scope as far as the function is concerned. However, since it's saying global, the keyword, it will make this a global variable. So if we do that, close these, too many terminals open, execute, you see that we get 100. So if we try to print before executing that function, if we cut this out and paste it up here, you'll see that X is not defined because we haven't called that function yet, so it hasn't made that variable global. So just make sure you're executing the function with your global variable prior to doing anything outside of the local scope with that variable. So if that's confusing, just make sure that if anything is accessing a locally scoped variable inside of a function, make sure that function is executing prior to calling on it. So hopefully that's not too confusing, but I know it's a lot of syntax to pick up, a lot of terminology. Another thing to keep in mind here is, as you saw before, like if we have X globally scoped and we assign it that value of 10, and then we want to change it, if we don't use global, we know that these are two separate variables in the eyes of Python. If we use that global X method here, if we use that keyword to access X, then we actually have access to the global X. So you see that we're actually changing the value and we're only getting one response, right? And if we were even to print here, this is before we call that function, myfunc. So you see here we get 10 and 100 because we're calling the global X prior to executing the function, which changes global X value equal to 100. So just remember that scope is incredibly important, as is the order that you're calling things, and a lot of errors come from that. So just keep an eye out, and thanks for watching. That covers scope, and we'll move on to the next lesson.